first of all, thank you very much for taking time here today as part of the Finance Indaba. Just to listen in as I share a little bit more insight on how we could maximize the ROI of a postgraduate education. The biggest investment anyone can make today is not your house, it's definitely not your car, but it's actually in the biggest investment vehicle in yourself. Today, what I'm going to share with you about is when you should embark on a postgraduate education, how, the selection approach for a postgraduate education, and I think most importantly as well, how to embark on a postgraduate education that can actually be a launchpad to an international career. In the age of globalization, there isn't going to be an insular job market as you can see today, right? So, for instance, as myself, so just by way of introduction, I spent probably 50 to 60% of my career abroad. When I was out of university, one of the first things that came up, one of my first career objectives was to enrich my career experience through an international career. I felt that was something that I'm very passionate about. So I worked in various industries. I've done telecoms, I've done management consulting. That was my foundation. And today I'm in the business of education. I lived abroad for a period of about 6 or 7 years. I've done mostly in not too glamorous places, I would say, more in the developing world. But I felt that was a decision that was definitely worth it, as I felt that the enrichment in the experience that I had from a career perspective and also as an individual, that really helped to mold myself to the person that I am today. So today, I've now spent 2 years in Johannesburg as the CFO of Monash South Africa. We're very passionate about what we do in Monash South Africa. And personally myself, I'm very aligned in terms of what we intend to achieve in Monash South Africa, which is to provide better access to internationally recognized high quality education in the African continent for Africans. It is an expensive endeavor. It is extremely time consuming. It requires a significant amount of effort to be able to complete a postgraduate education, especially if you're in a position like myself where you're also working full-time. So for instance, my first postgraduate education was I undertook a CPA, a Chartered Practicing Accountancy in Australia. So that sort of became a launch pad for me as I embarked into an international career. And today, what I've done as well is that apart from just working full-time in Monash South Africa, I've also decided to undertake my master's in international business, very aligned to what I do, as my second postgraduate education. So if I can divide it into the motivation for a postgraduate education, there's basically two rationales for it, right? And it depends on what stage of your career that you're in. If you're an early stage executive, so if I rewind back 10 years ago, when I was an early stage executive, I had probably about 2 or 3 years of working experience to have sort of like a taste of what it's like in the corporate world. You probably want to do it because you want to start differentiating yourself in the career market. So the most difficult transition or the most competitive period of your career would be the period between 2 to 5 years at the start of your career. Because everybody has the same degree, everybody has the same qualifications, everybody came from a good school, nobody came from a bad school, everybody came from a good school. So that sets you apart. That postgraduate education would help to set you apart if chosen correctly. Yeah. Now, the second stage of why or when you should pursue a postgraduate education is when you're at a level where you're in the mid to senior level within your organization, an assistant manager, or a senior manager. And the motivation to do so, to undertake a postgraduate education then, is basically to help you transition to the next level. So when you feel that you've done adequate time or gained enough expertise in the role that you've been doing currently as a manager or assistant manager, and you feel that you're ready to take a leap into a senior leadership or a sort of like a senior manager sort of role, this is what will set you apart if you choose the correct postgraduate education. Yeah. Okay, some interesting statistics that we have in Monash South Africa, which I want to share with you, and it's relevant into the South African context as well. So, as you guys, everyone here today, as you guys are listening to me, speaking on postgraduate education, I take it that there is some interest in this crowd to do so. Maybe in the next 12 months, maybe in the next 24 to 36 months. Now, when we did a working adult study to understand how big is the working professional market, and out of the working professional market, how big is it? How big of that cohort is interested in a postgraduate education? As you can see, where I highlighted down there, 1.2 million of working professionals in South Africa intend to pursue a postgraduate education sometime in the next 12 months. That's a big cohort. That's a big cohort of intent. Even if you take 10% of the people that actually would pursue a postgraduate education in the next 12 months, that's 120,000 people. And I don't think in this country there's enough capacity to fit in 120,000 postgraduate education, intenders. Yeah? And then when you look at the statistics of the motivation for a postgraduate education, you can see it's always two-pronged, right? And it's always going to be two things. I want a promotion or I want a career change. So 50% of that is basically the motivation of people that intend to undertake postgraduate education. So interesting insights. And as when you reflect on these numbers onto yourself, you'll be able to understand a bit better in terms of how other people are thinking, what's the cohort of people that you are sort of competing in this job market today. And the key takeaway from here, I would say, is that there's a strong desire amongst working professionals today to upskill, upgrade their qualification, and also increase their competency. And it's a reflection of the strong competitive market, job market that we're seeing today, not just in South Africa, but also across all over the world. Now, timing of a postgraduate education. In essence, what I distilled this down to, as I was thinking through this before I speak, was you can basically distill the timing to 3 time frames of an individual's career, right? If you're an early stage executive, or when you're in a career transition, or when you have yet to enter the job market, right? So those are the 3 distilled time frames for an individual to take up a postgraduate education. If you're an early stage executive, 3 to 5 years, that's the right timing to undertake so, because that's where you create a differentiation in yourself as you look to gain a promotion or gain a transition into a more supervisory managerial role. You're in a career transition. So if I were to relate back to myself, as I was looking to transition into a senior leadership role, so one of the few things that, based on the performance feedback that you always get, as you do your annual performance review, your manager would say, you're good, but you're not that good. You're not good enough for a promotion or for a senior managerial role, for instance, because of X, Y, and Z, right? So as I said, in the last 2 years, hearing all this feedback that I got, I realized that I was lacking. There was something that I was lacking in order to make that sort of quantum leap to the next level, right? And that is when I decided, okay, so this is probably the best time for me to take postgraduate education, because the return on investment will pay for itself once I actually enable myself to sort of transition across and address all the items that were highlighted as my deficiencies or key areas for improvement per se. So that I would say is what I call as a sweet spot. Yeah. Now, for those of you who are fortunate enough, if you could undertake an undergraduate degree and go straight into a postgraduate education, that's not exactly a very bad thing as well. The key hurdle here is always going to be affordability. But taking a full suite of education from your pre-undergraduate, undergraduate, and your postgrad education at one go pretty much saves you a lot of time. Yeah. And when you enter into the job market, statistically, it's shown that you will probably get about 10% differential versus somebody who only has an undergraduate degree. But then again, it will depend on your affordability as well. In my case, when I applied to myself, when I got out as an undergraduate degree holder, I went out into the market. I realized everybody was an undergraduate degree holder. It makes it extremely difficult for somebody who only had an undergraduate degree to compete in the market. I couldn't even get a foot into the door. I couldn't even get an interview. And that's the reality of the market 10 years ago. And I can't imagine if it's we put it into context of today, or 10 years down the road, I don't think you would even get into the door by having only an undergraduate qualification. Now, when selecting for a postgraduate education, since it's a finance Indaba, so I'm going to put it into a very finance context. Yeah. So it really and it applies for industries or areas outside of finance as well. It's basically distilled into two areas. Are you looking for a technical competency, or are you looking for a general management competency? What is the sort of career track that you're envisioning yourself to be? Are you going to be an expert in transfer pricing, for instance? Then an MBA is not going to do you any good, to be honest. Yeah. Are you looking to be a Big Four partner in the next 10 years? Then once again, MBA might not be the best sort of option for you to take. A specialization master's in auditing or in taxation, that's probably something more that would sort of enable you to transition to that career trajectory that you want. Yeah? Financial planning analysis, so that's where the area that I'm focusing more, or I've been sort of creating that sort of niche for myself. That's where, in application of myself, I felt that having a general management or sort of a MBA-like program would really help me a lot. Being the program is more geared into general management and also building this sort of network around you as well. This is something that I think I can really relate to when I look back into my career as well. The internationality element of any postgraduate education. Any postgraduate education that you intend to undertake would need to have an international element to it. The marketability of oneself is not just limited to the job market here within your local context. Yeah, it's also applicable for those who have ambitions abroad, or even if you don't have ambitions abroad. The international element is important, because if you don't think that you're going to go abroad, people are still going to come into South Africa with their international qualifications as well. So one of the biggest decisions that I made in the start of my career was I wasn't going to take a chartered accountancy qualification from my home country. I'm Malaysian, by the way. So I decided that I should sort of push the envelope a little bit and do something less familiar to the local hiring context, to the local recruitment context, but much more recognizable globally. So I took a CPA Australia qualification, despite knowing nothing about Australian GAAP, Australian standards, IFRS, nothing. But I decided to do that because I realized it was such a strong enabler for me to sort of embark into an international career, because everybody abroad recognized, or at least heard of, an international qualification from Australia, or a chartered practicing accountant from Australia, as opposed to my home country. Yeah, and education as well is a business, or it's a sector where you pay for what you get. You're not gonna get something. You're not gonna get education for cheap, and have quality attached to it or international recognition attached to it. There's no two ways about it. There's no buy one free two promo or anything like that. The moment you lose that premiumness, or the moment you enroll into a university or an institution which says they could give you 50% off on the study fees, that will be immediately what comes across your mind as what's wrong with the institution, what's wrong with the provider, right? Because it is a sector where nobody wants to attach non-premiumness or or high quality or non-high quality to their name. Yeah. Now, I always say embarking on a postgraduate education is a journey. It's a journey. It's not a means to an end, but it is something that oneself needs to sort of immerse themselves in some way and enjoy the experience. So once you've gone past the selection process, once you've gone past determining, where you're going to study, what you're going to do, what sort of qualification really brings you to the next level of your career, right? And once you're on board, that's where it plays a part as well for you to be truly engaged into the qualification. I think this is a no-brainer, right? But when I see in my master's class in international business in Monash, South Africa, what I take away from it is very enriching. I feel that having an international class from people from different nationalities, different continents, even different continents, helped me enrich my experience, my learning experience, and also in the long run, helped me to sort of manage within a multi-diverse environment as well. And I think that's becoming more important today in today's job market, where you see yourself engaging more and more with people across different nationalities. Calculating the ROI of a postgraduate education. As I said in the start of the presentation, this is the biggest investment you could make in your life, in essence, which is in yourself. Because you either get unlimited returns or you get zero returns altogether, depending on how you best utilize it. Yeah. So as I said, having the right selection approach, choosing the right program and the right timing, helps narrow you towards the kind of qualification that you want. The ROI that you earn, not from an intrinsic value. So I'm not talking about satisfaction. I'm not talking about the wealth of knowledge that you gain, but I'm just talking purely from an extrinsic point of view, which it will be your future income, right? So make two ways about it. It's all this is in terms of calculating ROI in terms of the money, right? Now, let me move on to the next slide. Okay, so ROI considerations. Now, if the biggest driver of your ROI is in terms of how much potential income you could earn in the next time horizon or so, right? Then what are the key considerations for a postgraduate education? What is the key elements of the ROI? It will be the tangible and the intangible factors that is in here. So for instance, number one, of course, one key element is how much is the tuition fees, right? That is a tangible factor. The cost of living. The cost of living while you're pursuing the education. If you're studying abroad or you're studying far from where you live, you may have to commute, and that's also another cost as well built into it. The impact to the family in terms of loss of income. So potentially in most postgraduate education, it runs from between 12 months to 24 months. And in some instances, I think not everyone could have the luxury of just studying it part-time. But some of them decided to take a full-on commitment and doing it full-time instead. Yeah. And of course, the third element, of course, is in terms of financing. If you're able to finance your education via your employer or via some form of scholarship, of course, that's going to be a plus point for you because you defray the cost of undertaking the education with support externally. The formula that I'm presenting here is fairly simple. And as I said, I'll caveat this again, this is more on the computation from a tangible factor. The first component of it, the 3 to 5 years incremental or full salary of a postgraduate education, right? That's one key driving factor. Say 3 to 5 years. It's the same as you calculate the ROI if you were to embark into a business. If you're gonna run a restaurant, for instance, you want to see your return on investment between a 3 to 5 year period. Anything longer than that, you may not want to do it, right? So, what's the incremental compensation that you think you'll be able to achieve? So, if you're, for instance, in a position where you're looking for a career promotion, and you feel that your career promotion is within reach after you take the postgraduate education, think about how much that promotion is going to give you uplift in terms of a monetary value. If it's not much, then that's something for you to consider as well, because then why take a postgraduate education then? Yeah. Then the second part of it is in terms of the loss of potential earnings. This is one factor which I feel very strongly about. I'm not a big advocate of doing a postgraduate education full time, because in today's environment, less and less people are inclined to step away from their work and commit to a postgraduate education on a full-time basis. The returns are not as great as it used to be. So if I give you an example, if you look at the trend of all the masters in program, all the big high-ranking masters program all over the world, your Harvards, your Stanfords, the US ones, and also the outside of US one, the INSEADs of the world, a lot of them are structured, becoming more structured to an executive MBA program. It's more on a part-time basis. You go for 2 weeks into a fancy new country, you learn about the program, you come out, and then you continue that block cycle again. Yeah. So it's becoming a trend nowadays that you want to try to do as many things as possible at the same time because you have a limited career lifetime in instance. Yeah. So if you were to be able to take up a part-time study, I would advise you to do so because you eliminate that loss of potential income. Yeah. Cost of tuition, I think cost of tuition, it is an expensive endeavor. I believe if you want to choose the right sort of profession or postgraduate education, it will be an expensive endeavor. If it's cheap, don't even bother doing it. That's my mantra. Yeah. Now the fourth element in terms of financing. Now it is an interesting subject, and also it's becoming more and more relevant in the South African context, right? We're seeing a change in the trend of how study financing are being crafted nowadays. In the next 3 to 5 years, because of what's happening in the public space, what you will see is there will be a lesser number of places within the public sector because they're not able to accommodate, right? So that's the reality of what's going to come. And what's going to happen as well is that with all this talk about financing the missing middle, that's being talked about in the news recently, there's also a realization that we're just at the first step of just financing the missing middle. But what about the people that are in the middle class segment? It doesn't mean that if you're deemed you can afford to do it, doesn't mean that you can truly afford to do it, because cost of living increases every year. You have other commitments that you need to commit to. So banks nowadays at least in the next 5 years, I would say, right, would structure financing based on employability. So that's my punt into the future. You would be able to get financing at a much preferential rate, or even at a much preferential terms in the next 5 years if you are studying for something that is highly employable. And the banks are beginning to structure some products like that, and you'll see it coming into the market. So think about the employability of the work that you're performing, and see if that's the right sort of pathway for you. And when you take a postgraduate education, you will definitely want to consider that as well, take into account. Leveraging for international career. Now, as I said, having the right qualification helps you a long way in terms of building an international career. Let me just share you, so before I elaborate further into this, let me just share you an interesting insight which I experienced when I was working abroad in India maybe about 5 years ago. So if you ever wondered why there's so many CEOs and senior personalities in American companies who are of Indian descent, have you ever seen that? The CEO of Google, for instance, Indian born. The CEO of Pepsi, Indian born, right? Now, what happened 30 years ago or 40 years ago that sort of sparked this creation of top-level CEOs that are from a single country? Interesting. So 30 years ago, 40 years ago, basically, the liberalization of the Indian postgraduate market, they basically opened up avenues for Indians, to undertake postgraduate studies at home or even abroad. So a mass exodus of Indians going into the United States 30 years ago has created this international career CEOs, basically, all around the world that we're seeing today. And today, what you will see is, when you go to all the grad schools in the world, or especially in the United States and in the United Kingdom, and even in Australia as well, you would see a huge cohort of Chinese working professionals taking up postgraduate education. And in the next 30 or 40 years, I'm predicting the same trend is going to happen as well. All the big Fortune 500 companies would have a majority Chinese person or Chinese descent person as their CEO. So all postgraduate education today is leveraged towards going into an international career. And when you undertake that as well, think about it. That's something that you should aspire towards as you embark on this. Going to the end of my slide, my presentation, I think I'll just repeat back some of the key takeaways that I got. It is a big investment decision, because it's an investment decision that impacts the biggest vehicle for the highest returns, basically, yourself. You're your own brand. You are your own person, which that has unlimited potential in some sense. So look back and think about the intrinsic and extrinsic value that you can derive out of the postgraduate education that you want to take on. Invest in the time, effort to make sure that you maximize the education that you will receive. I think to be truly engaged and collaborative within the postgraduate education that you will take, that will actually enhance your ROI in the long run. Lastly, make it an international launchpad. Don't think it from a domestic or a South African context alone, because whether you like it or not, in this age of globalization, the globalization will come to you as opposed to you going to them. So, one last time before I end this, I think at the end of the day, as you take up this investment decision, right? Think about it as a journey or a step or a pathway towards a better self or a better future for yourself. And make sure that, don't see it as a means to an end, but enjoy the ride along the way. And hopefully, as you consider all these elements that I presented today, it would be able to make you, at the end, as a final product, a better person in a better career trajectory. Thank you.